In a world of cold machines, the metallic soul remains the only thing that can truly feel the heat of passion. Experience the fusion of high-tech visuals and raw, ancient emotions in our latest 3D cinematic series. Hit subscribe now and join our exploration of the human heart.
They had no idea what my husband had already set in motion. And by the time they found out, it was too late to undo any of it. My name doesn't matter as much as what happened to me. But for the sake of telling this right, you can call me by the role I played in my family for 29 years. The responsible one. The one who never asked for too much. The one who held it together while everyone else fell apart, and then got thanked for it by being forgotten when it counted most. I got engaged to my husband in October. His name is Elliot. Wait, no, I need to check. His name is, let me start over. Let me tell you this the way it actually felt, not the way I've rehearsed it in my head 100 times while lying awake at 3 in the morning. My husband's name is Beckett. We met at a conference in Chicago 4 years ago. He was presenting on urban infrastructure financing, and I was there, representing the nonprofit I work for. He said something in the Q&A that made the whole room laugh, and I thought, whoever that is, he's going to be trouble. I was right, but not in the way I expected. The trouble he brought into my life was the good kind, the kind that makes you realize how small you'd been living. We got engaged in October, 2 years ago, a Tuesday night in our apartment over takeout Thai food. No elaborate proposal, no ring hidden in a dessert. He just looked across the table at me and said, "I think we should get married, like actually get married." And I said, "Okay." That was it. The most important conversation of my life, and it happened between a container of pad, see-ew, and a mango sticky rice. We set the date for the following September, 14 months out, plenty of time. I told my family at Thanksgiving, my parents, my older brother, and my younger sister, I'll call her by the role she played too, because that's more honest, the favorite. She was 26 between jobs, living back at home for the third time, and somehow always the center of every family gathering, despite contributing the least to them. My mom cried happy tears. My dad shook Beckett's hand about 4 times. My brother gave me a hug that lasted longer than usual, which from him might as well have been a speech. My sister looked at the ring and said, "Oh, that's pretty. Hey, can I have the last of the cranberry sauce?" I told myself it didn't sting. I'd been telling myself things didn't sting for about 20 years by that point, so I was practiced at it. We booked the venue in January. A restored farmhouse property about an hour outside the city, the kind with string lights and a converted barn and a field that turns gold in the late afternoon. We put down a deposit that represented roughly 2 months of my salary and felt like jumping off a cliff into water we couldn't see the bottom of. Beckett held my hand in the parking lot afterward and said, "We're doing this." I said, "We're doing this." I sent the save the dates in February, 14 months before the wedding. I sent them to everyone, family, friends, coworkers, people I'd grown up with, and people I'd met 3 years ago. My sister got hers, my parents got theirs, everyone got theirs. My sister texted me a week later, not to acknowledge the save the date, not to say she was excited. She texted to tell me she'd booked a trip, just got the most amazing deal on a retreat in Costa Rica. 2 weeks, all-inclusive yoga and surfing. September 6th through the 20th, I'm obsessed. September 12th was our wedding date. I read the text 3 times. Then I put my phone face down on the counter and stood in my kitchen for a long moment. Very still, the way you go still when your brain is processing something it doesn't want to process. Then I picked the phone back up and called her. "Hey, did you see my text? I'm so excited. I've been wanting to do something like this for my wedding is September 12th, I said. Silence. Right, she said. I know. You booked a 2-week Costa Rica trip over my wedding. The dates kind of overlap, yeah. But the deal was insane. I couldn't pass it up, and honestly, the retreat doesn't have any flexibility on the start date, so you got the save the date, I said. In February, I mean, Yeah, but September felt so far away, and the price. I hung up. I'm not proud of that, but I hung up because the alternative was saying things I couldn't take back, and at that point, I still thought this was something we could work through as a family. I still thought my parents would hear about it and handle it. They did not handle it. My mom called me the next morning. I expected her to open with something like, I talked to your sister, and she's going to see if she can get a refund. Instead, she opened with, you know how she is. She gets excited and acts impulsively. Maybe you could look at moving the reception to later in September so she could make it back in time. I made myself count to 5 before I responded. Mom, we have a contract with the venue. We've sent save the dates to 200 people. We have a photographer, a caterer, a florist, a band. We put down deposits on all of it. I understand that, but my sister booked a vacation over my wedding. A vacation she booked after receiving a save the date. That is not a scheduling conflict. That is a choice. My mom got quiet in a way that meant she was about to say something that was going to make me feel insane. I know that quiet. I've heard it my whole life. It's the quiet before she reframes whatever is happening so that I'm the problem. You've always been the strong one, she said finally. Your sister needs more support. You know that. I just think if you really loved her, you'd. I hung up again. Then I sat on my bathroom floor for a while. Not crying, just sitting, which is somehow worse. Beckett found me in there when he got home from work. He sat down next to me on the tile without asking any questions, and I told him everything. He listened. When I was done, he said, the date doesn't move. My parents are going to push. My parents are going to push. Then they push, he said. The date doesn't move. I want you to remember he said that, because it matters later. The pushing started the following week. My dad called, which was unusual. He usually delegates emotional conversations to my mom, which tells you everything you need to know about the dynamic I grew up in. He said he'd been thinking about it, and he felt that as the older sibling, I had a responsibility to set a tone of grace for the family. He used the word grace 3 times. I counted. Grace is not moving a 14-month planned wedding because my 26-year-old sister booked a vacation over it, I said. She didn't do it to hurt you. It doesn't matter why she did it. The result is the same. I'm asking you to consider how this is affecting your mother, how it's affecting. I stopped. I took a breath. Dad, my wedding date is September 12th. That's not changing. I would love for everyone to be there, but I can't control whether my sister chooses to come. He said he was disappointed in me, those exact words. Then he got off the phone, and I stared at the wall of my office for 10 minutes before my next meeting. What I didn't know then, what I found out about 6 weeks later, was that my parents had already started making their own plans. My grandmother on my mom's side passed away when I was in college. She left behind a trust that she'd set up years before she died. The trust had 2 beneficiaries, my sister and me, equal shares. But there was a condition. The funds were to be administered by our parents until both of us were 30, or until we each hit a specific life milestone. For me, that milestone was marriage. For my sister, it was completing a degree or starting a business. The theory, I think, was that my grandmother wanted the money tied to growth, not just handed over. My portion was significant. Not life-changing in a lottery winner sense, but enough to matter. Enough to cover the wedding venue deposit, the honeymoon, and a good portion of the down payment on the house Beckett and I had been saving for. I had always known the trust existed. I had never had any reason to doubt my parents would handle it fairly. I was wrong about that. I found out what they'd done from our family's attorney, a woman named, I'll call her what she is, the only adult in this situation. She had handled my grandmother's estate and maintained the trust documents, and she called me one afternoon in April because she was, in her words, uncomfortable with a request she'd received. My parents had contacted her to inquire about releasing funds from my sister's portion of the trust, specifically to reimburse her for the Costa Rica retreat. The grounds they were attempting to use were a creative reinterpretation of the starting a business clause. My sister had apparently mentioned at some point that the retreat was for wellness content creation and might become the basis for a social media presence. Our attorney told them she didn't believe that met the threshold. They pushed back. She held firm, and then she called me because she felt I had a right to know what was happening with an estate she was responsible for. "Has there been any discussion," she said carefully, "about your portion of the trust in connection with your upcoming wedding?" "I assumed it would be released when I got married," I said. "That was always my understanding." A pause. "That's correct. I want to make sure you're aware that I have received no request to release your portion, and I want to make sure you know your rights if any irregularities were to occur." I sat with that conversation for 3 days before I told Beckett. When I did, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I think we need our own attorney." We hired one. Her retainer was not cheap, and we paid it out of our savings, and I did not sleep well for approximately 6 weeks. In the meantime, my family escalated. My mom started sending me articles about the importance of sibling relationships in adulthood, articles about how to avoid letting wedding planning damage your family bonds. One article, I am not making this up, was titled, "When Perfectionism Gets in the Way of Love." She sent it with no message, just a link. My dad left a voicemail saying he thought Beckett was influencing me to be more rigid than I naturally was. Beckett and I listened to it together on speakerphone. Beckett's face went very still in a way I had learned to recognize as the expression he makes when he is being extremely careful not to say what he actually wants to say. My sister, meanwhile, posted about her upcoming Samishan Costa Rica retreat approximately 47 times across various platforms: sunrise yoga, packing lists, healing era captions. She tagged our parents in several of them. They liked every single one. My wedding was in 42 days when my parents formally told me they would not be attending. Not a phone call, a letter, an actual, physical, mailed letter, which arrived on a Thursday morning and which I opened at my kitchen table in my bathrobe with a cup of coffee that went cold while I read it. The letter said that they loved me, but that my unwillingness to prioritize family harmony had left them no choice but to step back from an event that had become a source of division rather than celebration. They said they hoped I would reflect on my role in creating this situation. They said they would be available to reconnect when I was ready to have a more open conversation. They were going to Costa Rica, not to join the retreat, just to take a trip, together, while my sister was there, while my wedding was happening. I read the letter twice. Then I folded it very carefully, put it back in the envelope, and set it on the counter. Then I walked to the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and cried for about 20 minutes. Not because they were coming, I think I had known for weeks they wouldn't, but because seeing it written down in my father's handwriting made it real in a way that the phone calls and the silences hadn't. Beckett came in and sat next to me. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "Okay, now I need to tell you something." He had been working with our attorney for 3 weeks on something he hadn't told me about yet. He'd wanted to wait until he was certain it would hold. He was certain now. When I had married into the trust's milestone framework, my parents were legally required to initiate the release of my portion within 30 days of the marriage. Our attorney had reviewed the original trust documents extensively. There was also, buried in the language, a clause that my grandmother's original estate lawyer had included. A clause my parents had apparently forgotten about or hoped no one would notice. If the trustees were found to have interfered with or delayed the release of either beneficiary's portion without documented legal cause, They could be held personally liable for damages, including legal fees, and a penalty equal to 15% of the total trust value. They tried to raid your sister's portion to pay for a vacation, Beckett said. Our attorney has documented that as an attempted improper distribution. And the moment they failed to initiate your release within 30 days of our wedding, they'll be in breach. I stared at him. I needed to know we had something real before I told you, he said. I didn't want to give you hope and then have it fall apart. How long have you been working on this? Since the night you told me what the family attorney said. I thought about all those evenings I'd assumed he was just answering emails, all those nights he'd stayed up later than me. The quiet, deliberate way he'd been building something while I was busy, just trying to hold myself together. The date doesn't move, I said. He smiled. The date doesn't move. Our wedding was on a Saturn. Beckett's family came. His parents, his brother, his aunt and uncle, his college friends who flew in from 3 different states. My friends came. My coworker, who'd become one of my closest people over the past 4 years, came and cried through the entire ceremony, which made me cry, which made the photographer work for her money. My brother came. He didn't say much, but he came, and he sat in the front row on my side, and when I walked down the aisle he was the only family member I had there, and he stood up. Just stood up. Like a reflex. I'll never forget that. 2 seats in the front row stayed empty. I had reserved them, and I chose not to have them filled. The barn was warm and gold in the late afternoon light. The string lights came on at dusk. Beckett cried when he saw me, not like a breakdown, just quiet tears he didn't bother wiping away, and I loved him so much in that moment that it was almost hard to breathe. We said vows we had written ourselves, full of inside jokes and specific memories, and one reference to the Patsiu that made our friends laugh and made my brother look confused. At the reception, Beckett stood up to speak. He thanked his parents. He thanked my brother. He thanked every person in that room. He was funny and warm and said things about me that I will carry for the rest of my life. And then he paused. The room got quiet in that particular way. Rooms get quiet when they sense something is about to shift. There are 2 people who should be in this room tonight, he said. They chose not to be. They chose a different trip. He didn't say this with bitterness. His voice was even, almost gentle. That was their choice to make. And my wife and I have spent a lot of time this year thinking about choices, who makes them, and what they mean. What I know is this. The people who are here made a choice too. You got on planes and drove hours and rearranged your schedules. You showed up. That's not a small thing. That's actually everything. He raised his glass to the people who showed up. 200 people raised their glasses. I am not ashamed to say that I reached across and grabbed his hand under the table and didn't let go for a long time. The legal process was not fast. I want to be honest about that. It wasn't a movie where everything resolves in a week. It took months. Our attorney filed the claim. My parents hired their own attorney. There were documents and depositions and a mediation session that I sat through in a conference room with bad lighting, watching my parents across a table and feeling like I was looking at people I had always known and simultaneously did not recognize at all. My mother cried during mediation, genuinely cried, and I felt sad about it. I want to be clear about that. It wasn't satisfying to see her cry. It was sad. It was sad that we were in a conference room instead of at my wedding. It was sad that they'd made the choices they'd made. It was sad that the letter they wrote, the one I still have in the kitchen drawer, had gotten us here. But sad is not the same as wrong. The trust's penalty clause held. My parents' attorney tried several approaches to argue it shouldn't apply. Our attorney was better prepared on each one. In the end, the settlement included the full release of my trust portion, the return of funds my parents had attempted to move into my sister's account through a transaction that hadn't fully processed before our attorney flagged it, reimbursement for our legal fees, and the 15% penalty. The total came to just over $218,000. My sister received nothing additional. Her portion of the trust remained frozen until she met an actual qualifying milestone. She did not, as far as I know, launch the wellness content business. The Costa Rica trip did produce a lot of Instagram content. Her follower count up by about 300 people. My parents called me 6 weeks after the settlement. My father, this time, not my mother. He said he wanted to talk. He said things had gotten out of hand. He said he hoped I understood that they had only ever wanted what was best for the family. I listened to the whole thing. I didn't hang up this time. Then I said, I understand you believe that. I also need you to understand that believing your intentions were good doesn't undo what happened. What happened has consequences, and we're going to need a lot of time before I can figure out what a relationship with you looks like going forward. He was quiet. I'm not closing the door, I said, but I'm not opening it all the way either. Not yet. He said he understood. I don't know if he did, but it was the most honest conversation I'd had with my father in maybe a decade, and I'll take it. Beckett and I bought a house in the spring. A small one, 3 bedrooms, a porch, a backyard that needs work. We used part of the settlement for the down payment. We had a houseplant warming party instead of a housewarming party because neither of us had the energy for a big gathering, and we invited the people who had shown up at the wedding and no one else. My brother came. He brought a plant, a big, healthy monstera that now sits in the corner of our living room, and that he texted me about 3 weeks later to ask if it was still alive. It is. I sent him a photo. He sent back a thumbs up. That's how we communicate, and I have stopped expecting it to be different, and I think that's its own kind of peace. Some nights, Beckett and I sit on the back porch with whatever we're drinking, and just don't talk. We've gotten good at that, at being in the same space without needing to fill it. I think that's one of the things nobody tells you about marriage, that the silences are as important as the conversations, maybe more. I still have the letter in the kitchen drawer. I've thought about throwing it away. I haven't yet. I'm not sure why I keep it. Maybe because it reminds me that I read it and didn't collapse. That I sat on the edge of the bed and cried, and then got up and got dressed and kept planning my wedding. That the 2 empty seats in the front row were there, and I saw them, and I still said my vows. Maybe I keep it because it's proof that something really did happen, and I survived it, and the person I married stood up in front of everyone and said, to the people who showed up. I showed up. He showed up. That turned out to be enough.